Brandon Nelms here for 3D Vision Technologies. I'd like to welcome everyone to the latest installment of our How to Solve webinar series, where our application engineering team brings you the latest and greatest tools and tips to help solve challenges you face every day. During this webinar, if you've got any questions or comments, please feel free to submit those. And as I wrap up, I'll try to address as many of them as time allows. Today we're going to be talking about SOLIDWORKS Visualize and how it can be used to make decisions earlier in the design cycle. Because with Visualize, what you see is what you get. I'd like to get started by answering a common question I get asked from a lot of customers with just one simple set of images. People ask me all the time, how good is Visualize at representing products for real? This is one of my favorite examples because when you look at this, those look pretty much identical. Yet one is CAD rendered with Visualize and the other one's a true, albeit very expensive, photograph. But as you can see here, it's a very accurate tool to be able to get product renderings. Before we get much further, I'd like to give some credit for the model that I'm going to use. I found this on GrabCAD. If you want, you can follow the link here to see more details on it. And when we talk about Visualize, I like to think what you see is what you get. It's really an engine to see our final product at really no production costs. We get a window into a digital reality, if you will, and inside Visualize we can use real-world settings to get that photo shoot set up without any of that cost. And when it comes to our products and getting them right, we know the devil's in the details, making sure all those details are accurate. And lastly, when I want to get it right, it means I need to know surface finishes and making sure my materials are going to be right. So let's dive in to this window of digital reality. I talk about Visualize as a window to digital reality, and I know it sounds pretty software heavy, but it really is. If we take a look behind the scenes here, we've got a viewport, and this is really that window I'm talking about because we're getting a real-time rendering, and not only just a rendering, but some insight as to what our product will actually look like. We've got different options. We can use this preview, and this preview is kind of like what SOLIDWORKS is at the highest level, which is just, CAD with some glossiness to it, if you will. There's really no accuracy to the ray tracing. Then we also have a fast option. So from here, as you can see, that window and what I'm seeing in here, we're actually doing passes across this where we're doing ray tracing to see how is the light reflecting in here? How's it moving across surfaces and bouncing off and casting shadows and things like that. So it's really showing me not only a quick rendering, obviously, but showing me an accurate product representation. So what I see right here is what I'm going to get if I go to render this. Notice with this fast setting, it'll stop at 100 passes. And there's a couple different options. There's downscaled. You can use steady, which basically these different options tell me whether or not I'm going to be trying to do resolution during different actions, whether it's the camera moving around or using what I like to use, which is that downscaled. So as I move, it's not going to try and over render or anything. Next to that is the quality mode. So as I select that and go, basically, as long as I let it sit here, it's going to render, and it's going to continue to render as if I was to say, let's run this job. So what's really cool about this is being able to, sit in front of a design review board or maybe in front of a customer and show them, hey, this is what we're thinking about for your product. And in real time, it's being rendered and coming up to speed. And so we can see what it's going to actually look like. Again, just as long as I sit here, let it res up, and don't move anything, it's going to continue to do the ray traces over and over and over for me, just to see how this final product would look. And for this setting, we've got it set up in this nice basic studio scene, if you will. But it's going up through 80-something passes now. What we want to see is just to show you, as this is set for quality, it's going to go past 100. Remember, with the fast setting, it stops at 100. So here we're at 100. And with the quality, it's going to go up and start to go past 100. So just as I'm sitting here, it's continuing to clear up and clear up. Hopefully it's showing through for you guys on the webinar side of things. But as you can see, we're getting more and more clarity to what our product is actually going to look like. We've got this window into our digital reality. So what does that mean for us? We get this immediate rendering feedback, right? There's no more second guessing, no more questioning. What is it that I'm going to actually get from my product when I'm rendering it? And not only from the rendering side, but what am I going to get when I produce it, right? So it's actually showing me what it's going to look like if I was in those conditions. And speaking of that, the next thing is obviously the very first thing I showed was of a studio scene, which is great for trying to get photography and stuff. But, a lot of times you want real world settings. What is my product going to look like when it's out in the real world, right? How do I get to a point where I can see this is what my product would look like if I had it sitting, on a deck or something? What kind of settings can I use? Well, I like to use environments and use things that's really like an easy button here. So if we take a look inside of Visualize, if I go to my Scenes tab, you can see what I've started using here, which is maybe just some directional lighting and classic studio to try and give you a look similar to what we showed early on from that photograph. But if I come over to my libraries and in my environments drop down, you can see I've got for my local library here. So I've also got a cloud library here where I can use all kinds of environments that are provided inside of Visualize. If I look here, there's something that says wood stage, which, this is power tools, which seems like would make sense for wood. So let's see what happens when I bring this environment in. And sure enough, it looks like it gets put on a deck here. And my background looks like I've got, some wood there and maybe some grass. But the lighting changed a lot. So let's take a look at the environment here. And I can see there's different sizes to it, but also a rotation that if I rotate, I can rotate and move this, not only my camera, but the environment as well. And it looks like this is actually on some kind of wood stage or wooden deck. Rotating this around some more, I can reposition what the environment is to see not only the background, but also the lighting. Notice that the lighting and shadows change as well. So what's this environment all about? Well, it's actually using an HDR image. And if we take a look at this HDR image, I've actually got a program here that will actually let us look at different HDR images. So if you notice, all of these environments that are built in here have got .HDR ending to them. So they're actually what's called an HDR image, which includes image information, obviously for that background, but also lighting information. So let's take a look at this wood stage here and what are we actually doing. So if you take a look here, this is actually a 360 globe, if you will, on a wooden stage. What's really cool about this is that it doesn't necessarily limit us to just the image, right? So it's really cool that we do get to see, all of the different angles, and we can go to different positions to be able to see our product, looking over this balcony there, or, moving it around to the front here a little bit more. But what's really powerful is the lighting that's built into this. So we're actually getting the lighting information as well. And you can notice that because we're back farther in the corner here, it's a little bit darker and dimmer compared to if we were way out front. But what's helpful with this is that it makes it so that we actually see what our product's going to look like in real time, actually in that true environment. It's almost like we're placing our product actually in that environment. So when it comes to real world settings, the Scene Easy button is using those environments and using HDR images, because if you want to know what your product's going to look like in a real world environment, use one of those environments that's similar to where your product's going to be used, and you'll get to see what it would actually look like. When it comes to rendering, a lot of times people talk that the devil's in the details, and they want to talk about details of moving slider bars and getting, different aspects of it to be exact. But something we don't talk a lot about is that maybe the devil's actually in the details of the model itself. How do we change things, and how does that impact our rendering? If we take a look at SOLIDWORKS and take a look here at the model we've got, made some adjustments to this, so we've got some different configurations. So we've got one that's called less detail. Maybe this was an earlier design in there. And then we've got one that's called even less detail maybe. And this was maybe even an earlier design along the way. So hopefully you can see it's changed a little bit, right? Something looks a little different. If we zoom in, we notice that all of these grooves in here are actually grooves. They're not just necessarily, split faces like what is out here now. These less details, what we've done is taken actual CAD material out, and so we've changed it. So this less detail, or our default, is to actually have a groove in there and have some sort of ergonomic grip over here. So if we want to make a change, so let's say, for instance, we're going to change this back to our less detail. So this is going to be maybe what we had originally designed for, and we said, yeah, that's close enough. Let's go ahead and render it and see what it looks like. Then we'll make some decisions from there. Once I save my model, if I go back over to Visualize and I select the actual part that I've got here, I can re-import my model and then get that geometry back in. Now, something I like to do, because obviously this is a little darker, so it's going to be harder to see, is create a new camera. So just Control-C and Control-V to paste a new camera. So I can go right back to my view down the road here. So now that I'm in this new camera that I copied, I can zoom in and see that detail actually does change. So when we were originally looking at it, if somebody in marketing thought, hey, well, maybe that's just lines that they drew on there, let's take a line off. Well, it's actually CAD material. So we're actually seeing what the product will look like for real, because those are actually shadows cast in there. If we need to change this and say even, less detail, maybe somebody says, hey, that grip out there is going to be too costly for us to do because our mold's going to be more expensive. So let's get rid of that. If we go ahead and make the change and save, and then come back over into Visualize and update our model again, we're going to see how does that change our product appearance. So note that the highlighting changes throughout. Up in the top there and down towards the bottom, it's going to look very different. And if I want to go back to see, well, how is it going to look for that original view, I'll just switch back to that camera. And as this reses up, I can see that it does look different, right? There aren't those dark lines in there that, it may have looked like it was some type of decal or something, but it was actually shadows being casted because there was a ridge in there. That's why it gets really important too for things like fillets, how two components interact with one another if they're, butted up right face to face. All of that shadow information and all of that is translated through and inside of Visualize. So what we actually see in Visualize is what our product's going to look like at the end. So really we need to know, accurate product representation. So get the truest form for our product that we can. Inside of Visualize, that gives us what we're really going to see and what we're really going to produce, so that we know we get that upfront understanding of design changes and how that impacts our actual end product. Lastly, when we talk about, getting materials right, we might look inside of SOLIDWORKS and say, hey, we know we're going to use aluminum, but let's look through, some different options, whether we want to use brushed or sandblasted or cast. And we may make a decision, based on some of the images we see there. But in reality, those are going to be very different than what the real world is going to be. So if we look inside of SOLIDWORKS, we know we're going to use aluminum. So we come over to our appearances and we're going to go get, different types of aluminum in here. So we're going to say maybe right out of the gate, let's use a brushed aluminum. and we're going to paste that to these different components. Now, this is a handheld power tool, so we want it to have some shine, but it can't look too shiny, right? It can't be too crazy because it's got to actually look like a tool that can do stuff. And that looks okay, but brushed aluminum is going to be more expensive. Maybe there's some other options that I can look at to try and help reduce my cost. Maybe sandblasted might be a different option for us. We've got some sandblasting that we do on other components. Maybe we can throw this in the lot and save some money. But that looks too bright to me. So maybe cast. That would be great, right? If I could use a cast aluminum, then I don't have to do any post-processing or anything. And I can get, much, much lower cost. But again, there it looks too bright. Really going back to this, it looks like that brushed aluminum, for whatever reason, brings in that darkness that I'm looking for. I still want it to have some shine, but not a lot. So maybe that's the decision I go. If I'm just working in SOLIDWORKS, that's maybe what I do. But if I actually go into Visualize and start doing this, as I drop in brushed aluminum and take a look at how is that going to look on my product, as I let this res up, I can see it's pretty shiny. In fact, it's a lot shinier than I thought. That almost looks like the cast or the sandblasted when I was over in SOLIDWORKS. So in real time, I'm getting some feedback that I'm not sure that this is the direction I want to go. So let's try sandblasted and see how it looks. And as it reses up, I can see that looks a lot better from a finish standpoint. It's not as shiny, but it seems actually even maybe a little darker than I want. Just maybe the way the light's playing in on it. But I'm getting real-time feedback that as this reses up, maybe I want to try some cast aluminum. And if I try cast aluminum, that would be great from a cost standpoint because I don't have to worry about any post-processing. But I was concerned it was going to be too bright right before. In this case, it looks like it's getting brighter as it's resing up, but it's not shiny like I was worried about, which is what I was seeing over in SOLIDWORKS. Now, what I might do here is actually start to send out some jobs because I want to try and render these up. So let's say do our cast here, and then I might send that to my queue once I've specified everything. So I can send it to a queue and be able to see what this is going to look like. So I can set up multiple jobs here. So let's say we do the brushed aluminum as well, because it went through 100 passes and it was pretty quick to give me some feedback, but I want to go even further with this. But I'd like to get a cup of coffee here in a second. So let's set up some job here. I'll do brushed and send it to the queue, and then we'll do sandblasted as well. And just setting up these different options that I might use. All just trying to get some more insight into, what finish do I want to use for my product. So then as I send that to the queue, I've got now in my queue here, got 3 different jobs coming in, more coming in. So there's my 3 jobs here. So now I can hit start queue and go ahead and start this up. And then once everything's rendered up, I can take a look through these images and see what my cast aluminum, my sandblasted, my brushed. In fact, that brush does look way too shiny. And the sandblasted looks a little too dark, but that cast looks just right. That looks like what I'm looking for. So when we're trying to get materials right, it's about reducing prototypes. We're trying to get an understanding beforehand of what does this product going to actually look like in a real world scenario before I end up spending money on getting a brushed aluminum prototype that I find out just does not look right when you take it out to a job site. And we can use the libraries that are built in. We don't have to build up our own materials. We can use what's there. So when we talk about Visualize and what you see is what you get, we talked about that window to our digital reality. We get that immediate rendering feedback to see what is our product really going to look like. We utilized the environments to be able to use that HDR image as that Scene Easy button. And we showed how, the devil is in the details, that as we get more accurate product representations, whether it to be add more detail or we're taking detail out one way or another, what we see in Visualize is actually what our product's going to look like. And we were able to reduce prototypes because we were able to get materials right by doing renderings beforehand, before we actually go get a prototype to find out, that brushed aluminum was way too shiny for a job site. So real quick, I'm going to check and see if we've got any questions, which it does not look like we do. So with that, I'd like to say thank you. And if you guys will join us next time, next Wednesday, Jeff Sweeney is going to be talking how to solve managing multiple files from multiple CAD systems with SOLIDWORKS PDM.